Welcome to our March Fireside Chant. My name is Abby Mack, and I'm on the marketing team here at McCurdy, and I'm joined by Kelsey Moore, who's our general counsel. This month, we're actually going to be talking about estate planning, and Kelsey is the perfect person to talk about this because estate planning is her specialty, her bread and butter, if you will. So let's get started. This month, we're covering some of the main reasons that you should start estate planning, and Kelsey's actually perfect for this because estate planning is her bread and butter. So let's get started. So Kelsey, with your experience, what would you say is a good age to start planning your estate?
So I would say any age, of course, not to be dark, but you never know when it's your time to go. I would also say that people generally associate it with older folks, but you're not just planning for your death, you're also planning for incapacity. Right. And my clients, I did estate planning and after death administration at my old job for about 4 years. They would always feel so relieved whenever they would leave, get everything signed, and then go out of there. And I was like, you did the big kid thing today. And it's something that is hanging over people's head for years, for the most part, before they do it. So I encourage people to it can't hurt to go visit with an estate planning attorney.
Mm-hmm. So obviously estate planning, there's a lot that goes into it. Mm-hmm. So why take the time to figure out what to put in your plan if you kind of just know that everything you own or everything you have is going to go to a spouse or your family?
So it's not always that straightforward. Mm-hmm. If you don't have a will or a trust and estate plan in place, then the loss tends to step in and fill the gap, basically. So even if you told your kids that they're getting this asset or this item, it doesn't necessarily mean that that's actually going to happen. I also think it's a good idea to do the planning because, well, kind of like I mentioned earlier, we all get old if we're lucky, and we all eventually pass. So you want to remove as much decision making or anything like that while you still have the power to do so. Your family will be grieving, and that makes it kind of difficult to make some decisions. So you want it to be done your way. Mm-hmm. And if you think that you want something to go to this beneficiary, then it's in your own best interest to make sure it is done properly rather than just verbally. Yeah. I've heard of, I had a few clients who, on the probate side of things, where it was like, hey, my husband has passed, but we're both on the house, and that might be true. But for example, if it doesn't have the right language, then they might own a 1/2 interest each, which means if husband passes, his 1/2 interest has to be probated if the proper language wasn't on the deed. Mm-hmm. That's just one example. And usually people intend for everything to go to the surviving spouse. Mm-hmm. Well, if you have nothing else in place, and Kansas law steps in, and we're in the scenario I just described where it's a 1/2 interest and a 1/2 interest. If, let's say this couple has children, so the wife owns her 1/2, and Kansas law would say that husband's 1/2 is divided 1/2 to the wife and 1/2 to his children.
Gotcha.
That's not the way that they probably intended it to be. Mm-hmm. Usually, if it's kids from the same couple and everyone mostly gets along well, they're fine signing over their interest to mom. Yeah. But it's not always the case. It's 2022 now. Mm-hmm. There are a lot of blended families, and even if it's same parents and same kids, not everyone gets along, especially when they're dealing with their grief. So it's just wise to make sure it's all done the right way in advance.
Sounds very complex.
Yes, it is.
It makes it a lot easier if you have your plan in place.
Sure.
So you kind of touched on this, but can you kind of go over some of the other benefits that would apply to your beneficiaries or your family if you did have that plan in place? Mm-hmm.
So one of the things, like I talked about, that people associate getting their estate plan in place with people being older. Mm-hmm. But think about a young couple that has minor children. And it might seem quote unquote obvious as to who would be the guardian if something, God forbid, were to happen to both of you. It's not. And so you want to make sure that you guys are on the same page and it's all written out so that there's not some kind of fight as to who gets the kids and who's the guardians of the kids. Right. And it might, I can't emphasize enough that it might seem like it's all going to be obvious, it's all going to work out. It doesn't always happen that way. The other thing is, is that sometimes people don't want to spend the money initially to do their estate plan. They're like, hey, maybe somewhere down the line.
Yeah.
But in most cases, you spend less money getting your estate plan put together by a professional who knows what they're doing, and it's done the way that you want it to be done, than if you just have a laissez-faire attitude and wait until you pass, and then your estate will likely end up spending more money on the back end, especially if there is some fussing and fighting, but even if there's not, just getting everything straightened out. So it's wise for you to make sure things are done the way that you want. It is cheaper in the long run, I would say, in most scenarios. And you just want to remove the decision-making process from your family when they're already going to be going through that grief.
Right. Yeah.
So
seems like I have some homework for myself.
yeah, just a little
Might
bit.
need to start planning and thinking about some
Yes.
things. Didn't realize it, but you know, like you said, it's when you have a retirement account, when you own your house. Like I may assume that my spouse gets everything, and that may not be the case.
Right.
And I definitely don't want to put my family through that. So lots of good little tidbits of information.
Yes.
Yeah, but thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah.
And if you guys are interested in getting started, kind of like myself, Kelsey has been generous enough to help write our blog post this month. So it kind of breaks down the estate planning process into 3 easy steps, but she's also gone a step further and included a downloadable checklist for you guys that kind of goes over some documents that you guys can compile to get started. So thanks so much for joining us, and we'll see you next month.